What happens when the role that you built your life around suddenly disappears? Not because you failed, not because you walked away from God, but because something inside of you just couldn't keep going the way it was. For a lot of people in ministry, the exception is that stepping away will bring relief. But what if it doesn't? What if instead everything underneath starts to surface? Today's conversation is what it looks like when your identity unravels, your faith gets stripped down to its core, and you're forced to learn to trust God without the structure that once held everything together. Welcome to Unmasked, where we take off the filters and we get real about faith, failure, and finding freedom. I'm your host, Wesley Farnsworth, a dad, veteran, author, and a man who's learned that God does his best work in the middle of our mess. Each episode, we have honest conversations with people who have walked through addiction, pain, or doubt, and with pastors, leaders, and everyday believers who are learning to live and lead authentically. So take a breath, pull up a chair, and let's get real. This is Unmasked. Today on Unmasked, we are joined by Dustin Kleinschmidt, a former lead pastor who spent more than 25 years in vocational ministry before stepping away from the role that he had built his life around. What he expected to bring relief instead led to an unexpected unraveling, facing anxiety, depression, and loss of identity that he had never experienced before. Out of that season came a deeper, more honest understanding of faith. One not built on performance or certainty, but on trusting God in the middle of the wilderness. Dustin is the author of The Wilderness Way, and his story is a powerful reminder that sometimes what feels like everything falling apart is actually where something more really begins. Dustin, thanks for joining us today on Unmasked and being willing to share your story with the Unmasked community.
Wesley, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I'm excited to have this conversation, and you did an awesome job with the intro, man.
Hey, thanks so much. So before we jump into everything, because I know there's a lot to unpack to your story, I want you to kind of give us some framework. Take a few minutes and give us the backstory. Help us understand what your life and ministry looked like leading up to you stepping away, and what you expected during that transition, and what actually started to unravel once you were actually out of the role.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in the church, so I grew up in a fairly chaotic childhood, at least for the early portions of it, and never was part of church. My mom wasn't someone who held a strongly held faith. My grandmother was devoutly Catholic, which is probably part of why my mom was not very devout. But yeah, so I wasn't looking for anything. And wasn't like I was a teenager, so I didn't have any kind of existential fear of death or anything like that. I was just being a teenager. But that childhood had informed a lot of my sense of worth and self-worth, and the pursuit of identity and significance and all those things. And in high school, I had a friend in a class with me who started inviting me to his youth group, and he tried every angle, and finally found the one that works, which is, hey, I've got a friend that I'm dating and she has a friend. Would you like to come to church and hang out with us? And ultimately that worked really, really well. So I was plugged in, and the church that I grew up in at that point, I was probably 14 at the time, was an amazing place for discipleship. Like there was a strong emphasis on developing people to follow Jesus. And we had amazing small group leaders. Like everything was, it became the family that I didn't have previous to that in many ways. And strong male figures that I hadn't experienced that were healthy, but then also real, like weren't, sugarcoating things or just painting a verse on top of things, but really wrestling through hard things. And so that church that I grew up in, I stayed in for over 20 years. So I was, I went from high school student to intern, you get into college age, and then it's like, hey, we're looking for a youth intern or a tech intern. And so I kind of bounced around, and I've always been kind of a helper type. So I'm not good at sitting in the cheap seats and watching things. I was like, I want to be involved. So even in high school ministry, when I was in high school, it was like, I knew how to run a video camera. So it's like, okay, you're the video guy. And then it's like, hey, I could mix a little sound. And so it just kind of organically developed. I always say I never aspired to be in ministry. I kind of tripped and fell backwards into it in many ways. In college, became close with my college pastor, who ultimately became my roommate. And the joke, as it goes, which is actually true, is that I knew 4 chords on a guitar. He knew 3 chords on a guitar. That made me the worship guy for our college ministry. Like, it was that simple. And so I was playing guitar and leading worship. And then, again, this search of significance, I was pursuing a career in the music business on the side. So I'm kind of, part-time interning at the church, leading worship in our youth department and doing some odds and ends, but then really invested in kind of a career in music, was working with a production company and producers and had a record deal and kind of chasing all that stuff down. And was literally on stage in a club in Hollywood playing a show. And it was like one of those few times in my life where the Lord like feels audible almost. And he was like, hey, you're done. And I was very confused. I was like, wait, what? Like, and I remember going home to my roommate, the college pastor, Dave, at the time. And I was like, hey, I think I'm done with the rock star thing. And he goes, well, that's interesting. He's like, I've been thinking about wanting to bring on a full-time student ministries worship pastor. He goes, you came to mind, but you were focused on this music career thing. And so, long story short, we kind of pursued it, talked with the elders about them bringing me on staff full time. It's a relatively large church. I mean, but definitely by Los Angeles standards where I grew up. And we honestly didn't think the elders would go for it because it was a kind of a wing and a prayer idea to develop, to have a full-time role that really my job was to develop a curriculum that would help students grow in their understanding of music. So like do some lessons and stuff, but then also wrap that in like understanding worship and a theology of worship and what does it really mean to worship with your whole life, and then build student bands and then help lead worship throughout the whole church and all the different ministries. And the elders signed off and they hired me full time. And so I was like, I hadn't finished a college degree. Like I said, I've been tooling around Hollywood in, pleather pants, playing shows. Like I was doing all the things. And yet I had a deep love for the church. I had a deep love for discipleship. And I had a deep love for the people that I was invested in. It was an amazing group. So I started serving and was full-time in that role for over 7 years. And when the economy and the housing market collapsed in 2008, 9-ish, my role got cut. And so then it was like, okay, what do I do now? And, my wife, by then I'm married. We've got 2 kids, got 2 small boys. And my wife's like, I don't want to live anywhere else but California. And I was like, well, that'll shorten the search. And but what we did is we were like, okay, let's just pray. And I told her, I said, look, God will never lead me. He'll never tell me something that he's not capable of telling you. So I won't force you to go anywhere. We'll just kind of see. And it ultimately led us into the Dallas area. There was a church that had planted about 5 years earlier. I knew the leadership that had planted that church because they had planted from our area. And weird set of circumstances, very much a God set of circumstances, where I reached out to him asking him if he knew something about another church in the area at the same time, literally the same day that his worship guy resigned to go be a firefighter. And he was like, why? What are they offering you? And I was like, I don't know. Why are you asking? And ultimately what they needed as a fast growing church was like a worship and discipleship hybrid. So help oversee small groups and do worship, which I did, and handed off the worship stuff after a couple months, like 6 months probably, to someone else that was already there. And then did discipleship and small group ministry for the next 7 years at that church until they sent us to plant a church in about 30 minutes away. And along that 7 years, I had concerns about that leader of that church plant, the pastor of that church. He and I had butted heads over some things, and there were some things that felt unhealthy, but it wasn't clear. I just was trying to be faithful. But he was definitely more of your like a stereotypical singular authoritarian type leader, not aggressive, but more so passive aggressive in the sense of like, if you were like, hey man, I think you should think about this, he'd be like, okay, let me pray about that, which meant no, but it was kind of his way of dealing with that. And so I had a lot of tensions around that. And again, one of those moments where the Lord's like, you just be faithful and trust me with him. And so I was like, okay, I'll keep my head down and just continue serving in that church. And really saw God do some amazing stuff. That church grew dramatically. Saw God do some really, really cool things and got to be a part of it. But ultimately it led to knowing that I wasn't going to be able to be there long term, because he and I were never going to see eye to eye in what leadership looked like and how we could coexist. It led us to planting a church about 30 minutes away, which we did in 2017, and took about 30 or so people, not took, but like they stood us up and prayed over us and sent us with 30 people, give or take, to a town about 30 minutes away called Murphy. And we planted there and started in my living room, and then, moved into a middle school and set it up and tore it down every Sunday. And I had to bring a change of clothes because he'd be sweating so much after setting up that you're like, I can't wear this shirt and teach at the same time. So all the things, my kids were the sound kid, like both of my sons, one ran slides, one read sound. Like it was a whole family affair. And we did that starting in 2017 and saw some slow growth. I mean, the community we moved into, part of why we loved it is because it was very diverse for the Bible Belt. It's 22% Muslim, which is significant. And we really wanted to be somewhere where we could love on and share the gospel with people who hadn't necessarily grown up in church. I really wasn't interested in, finding a new form of entertainment for a group of Christians that were maybe bored with their last church, because that can tend to happen in the Bible Belt. So we did that, and then COVID hit, and we did the bob and weave and pivot where it's like, okay, well, we're not going to meet in person. We're going to set up a camera in my living room. The schools obviously shut down. We can't meet in the schools. And then it was like, okay, let's meet in 3 different houses so we can keep the numbers down. And we kind of shuffled. But as the COVID thing went on, our leadership team, our elders, and I started talking about, hey, we've been at this for almost 4 years. If whatever the backside of this looks like, it's starting over again. And so we're basically going to start over with a church plant and plant it again. And we were really concerned of the impact that was going to have on our people, because they had worked really, really hard for 4 years, in addition to being parents and having full-time jobs and loving one another well. And then they got me going like, hey, can you come at 7 a.m. and set up the church? And then, hey, can you lead a small group? And hey, you should really reach out to your Muslim neighbors. And so it's just, there's only so much bandwidth people have. And we got to a point, we prayed through it as a church for a whole month. And ultimately decided that we would rather let the church go and and help the people be connected to Jesus and continue to following him passionately, than to basically push through and the potential of running people into the ground. So we shut down the church at the end of 2022. Yeah, 2021. And at the same time, the church I'd come from in LA, or in the other area of Dallas, in Rockwall, Texas, that senior pastor that I had had so much challenges with had resigned, and it had come out that he had had a moral failure. And so that church had grown really big. They were literally in the middle of their first building project. They had bought land and built a building on it. And then he resigns. Everything kind of comes out. All the elders resign because there's just so much distrust going on. Like, staff are like, they think the elders know things, and it's just a mess. And in the middle of all that, it's COVID. So people aren't really connecting in person all that much. It's like fragmented and fractured. And so they kind of put together a makeshift leadership team, including the guy that had kind of taken my role when I transitioned out. And I had kept in loose touch with a lot of the leadership there, other than the senior leader. And at some point, basically, they were like, hey, would you be willing to come back and help us? And since we had transitioned out, we prayed, and initially we're like, hey, we can give you 6 months kind of in an interim level. And we did that. And then as that went on, it turned into, hey, would you come back and be part of our lead team and help lead our church? And we knew, my wife and I remember having long conversations about like, this is not going to be easy. Like there's a lot of distrust around leadership in general. There was fear around me. Like, is he just coming back to take over? All the things that you would deal with, and a lot of very wounded people. And so we knew it was going to be hard, but felt the Lord say go. And so we went. We stayed living where we were, and we would commute in. We weren't ready to move back yet. We just wanted to stay just to kind of see. And I, like, the way I describe it is, I don't think my key card swiped the door the first time before it was just crisis after crisis, having to transition staff out and budget cuts and, burning through savings and struggling to get the building opened. And then, I'm trying to slow down momentum and not move as quickly because people are they're shell shocked with everything that's gone on in the last couple of years. And then you've got some leaders who are going, hey, why aren't we moving faster? And other leaders are going like, why are we moving so fast? And it just became a lot. And it all culminated in an elder meeting that I talk about in the first chapter of my book, where a couple of younger leaders basically crashed our meeting with approval. Like they asked, but they weren't. Originally, that elder meeting wasn't going to be about them, but they crashed the meeting and went around the room basically telling all the leaders, the volunteer elders and myself why, and the other lead guy, why they could no longer follow our leadership, and basically how horrible of leaders we were and that we were inept and maybe it was time for us to move on. And if that of itself was like, okay, well, that stinks, but they can find new jobs, right? Like that's kind of the instinct. But I was so fried, and I heard the other elders kind of waffle a little bit in terms of like, well, okay, what do you guys think we should do? And I just was like, I'm not going to take the bullet for having to fire these two guys and not be able to tell the whole story, because you wouldn't throw them under the bus. You wouldn't stand up in front of the church and say, hey, let me tell you everything they said. And I got in my car and I was driving home and I called my wife and I said, I don't see a way forward. And within a couple of days I had sent my resignation and said, hey, like it's easier for me to step away and for you guys to figure it out than it is for me to have to make the decisions I know are in front of me in the state I'm in. And basically the way I describe it is, I spent so much time fighting with that church, I could no longer fight for it. And I was fried, and I just didn't see a path forward. And so that kind of led me to that spot where it was like, okay, I'll resign. I can figure something else out. You can't throw a rock and not hit a church in Dallas. Like, I'm sure we can figure something out. And so I thought it was going to be a relief, and it ended up not being a relief at all.
Wow. So, all in all, you had about 25 years of ministry, correct?
Yeah.
So, from the outside, I mean, ministry is kind of like this role. I mean, people tend to put ministers on pedestals, right? And I've growing up in the church, I've seen that time and time again. I've been there where I've had to go in and set up churches and stuff on Sunday morning before everybody shows up. So I know that pain. But from the outside, being in ministry, there's a role that the role provides some clarity, purpose, respect, that type of stuff. But internally, there's other things that are often going on. So internally, what identity were you actually carrying during this season of, ministry and everything going on?
Yeah, it was an interesting duality, in the sense that, so two pieces. One, I felt a deep sense of responsibility as one of the leads. So they didn't hire me as the lead pastor as you would normally think of it. And that was intentional because the previous lead pastor had singular autonomy and it hadn't gone well. And so it's like, hey, let's build a team. And so let's counterbalance. Like, I don't have all the gifts and this other guy doesn't have all the gifts, but maybe together we could create a good team of leadership plus an elder team around us. And so there was an attempt to protect the church from feeling like I was coming in, to just kind of wreak havoc and take over. But then also genuinely, like, I was like, I don't want to carry the whole weight of a church. Like, I know Paul said he became all things to all men so he might reach some. That didn't mean he did every role all the time and everything. And there is a sense that we expect that of our leaders, especially our top tier leaders, church, otherwise. It's like, you got to know all the things, you got to do all the teaching, you got to be at every bedside, you better know budgets, better know how to work QuickBooks. Like, you have to know all the things. And so there was a part of my identity that was like, okay, well, I actually am kind of a Swiss Army knife. I've been in a lot of church settings and played a lot of roles. So I can intelligently speak into these spaces. So there was a part of me that was like, I can be that guy for you guys. I can help us build and rebuild. And I had a good leadership pedigree, and I understood servant leadership. And so there's a part of my like identity that was like, I can be what you need me to be, and I can hold it together. And in that is this kind of like that type A part of me that was like, I can move, like I could tell who's not going to make it, who is going to make it. Let's move down the street. And then the other side of it was, don't be too big, don't be too much, like slow your roll. Don't overwhelm them. And so I was kind of internally fighting this battle of being two different people. The type A side of me that was like, man, I can clean house in 6 months and we could be rock and rolling. Yeah, it's going to hurt if we rip the Band-Aid off like that, but we can get there. And then the type B side of me that's like, wait a minute, slow down. These are people. They're not projects. And so I was carrying all of the weight of that sense of responsibility and having to at least look like I had it figured out, and then have the answers or be able to counter the arguments or whatever it would be at every turn. And, like I told our elders after I had resigned, I told one of the elders, I said, look, when I made hard decisions, I felt like you guys did a good job standing behind me, patting me on the shoulders going, hey man, sorry, this stinks. But you never stood in front of me. Like, you never took the bullet with me, even though they weren't just my decisions. Like, we all decided that this staff person should step down, but then I got blamed for it. And you guys were like, yeah, it stinks you're getting blamed for it. Like, no one was there with me. I was out on an island. So my identity was very much tied into being what they needed me to be. And the they is very broad because everyone needed something different.
Yep.
And so that pulls in a lot of different directions.
It absolutely does. Yeah, and I've seen that time and time again where, like you said, you're expected to be able to do everything and be everywhere all at once, and that can really wear you down.
Mm-hmm.
In our conversations before we recorded today, back and forth, you had mentioned that your performance subtly replaced surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look back now, where did that shift really begin, and how did you justify it at the time?
It's a great question. I wish I could tell you that there was a moment that it shifted. I don't have that, but what I do have is the moment I realized it had started shifting. And I do think that these things are more erosion than instant. It is. And again, like for me, it was never like, it wasn't compromise in terms of like value. Well, values is a different thing, but in terms of integrity or anything like that. But what it was I remember a moment. So I had, in different times I had taught things, we're a relatively conservative church, had, everything in Texas has Baptist roots, but generally speaking, kind of that kind of a theological framework. I'm probably a little more centrist than a lot of people. And there had been a conservative strain of believers that were really there that were, my joke to them was, you guys put the fun in fundamentalism. And so, they all had MacArthur study Bibles, and they all had this really deep sense of like what their theological convictions were. Not bad. I agree wholeheartedly with a lot of them. But I also was like, hey, but like, I'm not going to drink all the Kool-Aid or live or die on this thing. And so there had been things I had said at different points in teachings that ruffled their feathers. And again, so then it's like, okay, 3 emails on Monday, 2 phone calls later, gather a couple elders, try and walk through and explain, no, this is what I said. This is what you heard isn't what I meant. So I'd had some of those conversations. Then I started finding myself doing that math equation while I'm teaching. And that's the moment where it's like, oh, if I say it this way, it's going to be the point I'm trying to make, but it could be misinterpreted this way. And again, all this is going on in a split second while you're standing on a stage. or I could soften it so that I'm trying to appease this group. But you know what I mean? And so there's this thing, it's this weird thing that starts to happen where no longer am I just going, okay, Lord, what is it you want to say? And I'm going to come in and I'm going to do that as genuinely and clearly as possible, rooted in the text, the best that I can, and then deal with it. I was starting to kind of adjust. And those adjustments, I started to realize, oh, okay, I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to please. Like I'm not living as clear-headed and clear-hearted, and I'm letting these different voices lead me in ways that they probably shouldn't.
Wow. So everything that you're going through, it eventually leads to you stepping away. I want to talk a little bit about that now, because when you stepped away, you expected relief. But instead, though, you mentioned that you experienced things like anxiety and depression,
Mm-hmm.
and things that you really hadn't dealt with before. So, what was the actually unraveling in that moment, and um, what was actually unraveling in that moment when the role was gone?
Yeah, great question. It was you're right. I will say, like, the first week or two was a relief. Because the noise stopped, at least the noise that was pummeling down on me. Now, that external noise stopped, but then what happens is when the external noise stops, a lot of times the internal noise starts to increase, right?
Yep.
And I think that's a lot of what was happening. So I resigned. I had never had an anxiety attack in my life. Um, about 2 to 3 months after, we are visiting a church that we're like plugging in. It's like, that's a bummer of losing church roles, is that you don't just lose your job, you lose your community in many ways. Very rarely does a staff person leave a church on staff and stay at the church. It's just not normal because it's awkward. It's weird. I get it. So now we're trying to establish community. We're trying to get connected and kind of find a new home. And we happened to meet a couple who had an adjacent relationship, not even a direct relationship, to some people from the church I had come from that I had just been on staff at. And again, they were talking like, oh, yeah, we love so-and-so. They're really cool. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome that you know them. And internally, my heart and I started to spiral. Like I felt my chest tighten up. I was like it was a weird, I'd never felt this before in my life. And I remember we get in the car and my wife was driving and I go, I got to call somebody. Like, this is not okay. And so I had recently, a friend of mine had told me about a counselor that he suggested. And I literally texted that counselor right then and there and was like, because I'd been putting it off, like, yeah, I'll talk to him at some point. And I texted him and said, hey, can we jump on the phone this afternoon? And so, and that led to ongoing anxiety and panic attacks over the course of the next 12 months. Not constant, but just this ebb and flow. And I think what I was going through was one, there's a book called The Body Keeps a Score by Wessel Vanderbeek. He's a neuroscientist. But he talks about how trauma, and when I say that, I'm not just talking big T, but little t, just like stuff. Life happens to you, and you, when your disposition, like mine was, head down, keep moving forward, head down, keep moving forward, figure it out, get the answer, move forward. When you don't account for what is going on, at some point, your body is going to tap out. And I think some of it was my body going, yeah, no, we're good. Like we're taking some time off, buddy. Like the alarms have to go off. And I had not, I had been attentive to my emotional and mental health, but not enough to really deal with what was really going on. And so that led into really deep counseling, looking back into kind of the trauma and the chaos of my childhood and how that was impacting the way I was thinking. It's really hard not to feel like a failure. And so you come out of something like that, and even though the church kept going, you're like, yeah, but I failed, right?
Yeah.
And then there's an active enemy who is poking and prodding at that stuff, going, yeah, you are a failure. Yeah, you did mess up. And my sense of worth, 25 plus years in vocational ministry. And then I'm going like, who am I? Why am I here? Am I just going to go be a greeter at Walmart? Like, what am I going to do? You know?
And that's something I want to touch. I want to talk about here a little bit more because and I can speak to this from personal experience myself, and I think anybody that's ever lost a job can. When
Mm-hmm.
your identity is tied to what you do, when you lose that role, you essentially lose yourself and you're starting all over. You're rebuilding from the ground up.
Yep.
So when you lost this role and now you're in this season where you don't have a ministry role anymore, you're experiencing things that you had never experienced before. What did all of that cause you to start realizing about your identity, that you hadn't really even thought about before?
Yeah. Here's the crazy thing, Wesley, is that I'm still figuring it out. I met with my counselor today before this interview with a new realization that ultimately, for the last 2.5 years, I've been saying my identity was in ministry. And what I realized through journaling and prayer and wrestling through things, even last week, is that it really wasn't that my identity was attached to ministry as much as my identity is attached to significance. Ministry was the tool for significance. And so ever since I was a kid, there's always been something in me that's wanted to make a difference in the world, and make a difference in the lives of people. And not even to the degree that I needed the accolades for it. Like I don't need the press. Like, I'm relatively shy, in many ways. And I don't like attaboys, but there is a deep, deep longing in me to matter in the world. And so ministry really became the vehicle for that. In a really, I mean, again, like every good thing has a shadow side, right? And so in a really good way, that the pure part of that desire was definitely ministry driven, and ministry was driving that, or being driven by that. The dark side of it was all of a sudden I was left feeling like, well, I don't matter anymore. And I don't, like, what am I, like, why even be here? Like, okay, if and now I'm older, so it's like, well, I guess, my prime's gone. I can't, what am I going to do now? Like, I don't want to go be a lead pastor because everyone, like, I'm not the cool young guy. I don't look good in skinny jeans, right? Like all of those types of things. So I think what God was doing is he was beginning a process that, like I said, I'm still in, of unraveling where my sense of value and purpose come from and what it's rooted in. And ultimately, ministry was a vehicle, but it really boils down to significance. And again, there's a good and a bad side to that. And so I'm learning that piece too, that it's not all bad or all good. It's like, no, I hold them in tension. Like even doing interviews like this or the book, it's like, Lord, I really want you to use these to help people. And yeah, there's a part of me that wants to feel like I'm, special, I guess, or whatever, however you want to frame that. Right. So that was, I think that's been the most significant thing from an identity standpoint, is that realization that, that I find my significance in the impact I can make, rather than just being able to find my significance in the fact that I am a son of God and that Jesus has died for my sins and that I am rescued and whole, and he's gifted me and he's given me these experiences, and I do get to share those, right? I get to show my scars and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't define my worth. And even though I've known it here for years and, learned it in Greek and Hebrew in seminary, and I did all those things, but it's funny how hard it is to get it to really lock in your heart.
Yeah, it really is. And that's one of the things I'd say on this show time and time again is, what the things that happened to you or the things that you did, they're a part of your story, but they don't define who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you brought that up. So with everything going on, okay, was there a moment where you realized that, hey, I actually don't know who I am and I don't know how to function without this version of myself?
Yeah. Again, I think it's kind of like peeling an onion. So I don't know that there's these. I have had some aha moments, but I think the Lord's been more gracious with me. Like I'm a slow learner. And so he's like, okay, well, just take this one step at a time, big guy. Like he's just I'm like a toddler. It's like, hey, we're just going to take a step, then you fall on your butt and then I'll help you up and then we'll take another step. So it's a little bit of that. But I do think that, again, I talk about this in the book, but I turned 50 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And on my 50th birthday, I was in the middle of like kind of working on the book, and I've been working with a consulting company a little bit, working with churches, and just trying to, like, I didn't know what I want to do. I just was still kind of wandering. But I was in a really dark place, like darker than I'd ever been, to the point where, like, my wife said, she goes, "Hey, like, it's your 50th birthday. Do you want to do something?" And I'm like, honestly, I would never take my own life, but I would prefer not to be here. And one, it was important that I told her that, because I had been feeling that for a while, and was like, I've never, like, that's never even, I've never fathomed that. And then all of a sudden, now I'm in this space where it's like very much, Elijah in the wilderness, where he's just like, "Hey, Lord, take me." And the Lord's like, "Why don't you take a nap?" Like that, maybe you should sleep a little bit. But that was where I was at. I was in a really, really dark place. And I think that was probably that breaking moment of like, okay, I got nothing. And if I have nothing and I don't know anything, then what if I just sat here with open hands and stopped trying to solve it or fix it or posture it or angle it, and I just let it, like, if I just grieved what it is. And this is, I think, what my counselor was trying to get me to, is like, hey man, like, just let it suck. Like, let's just do that. And it took me a long time to get to the place where I could just let it be there. And I think that was probably that moment. And it really was, in a good way, a pivot point.
Yeah, nobody wants to embrace the suck, but sometimes you have to do that in order to heal. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hey, on that note, let's just pause here real quick. And I want to talk to the listeners. If you're listening to this and there's something that spoke to you, you're like, wow, that's a really good point. Or, man, I can relate to that. Or maybe God brought somebody to your mind. Would you just take a quick second and send this episode to them? Because you never know who might start to find some healing or some other kind of breakthrough with just a simple conversation, a simple share. So take a moment and share this episode. I would really appreciate it, and I'm sure the person that you send it to will as well. So I want to get back into this now, because there's still a lot to unpack here, and I have so many questions for you. So I want to turn now and talk a little bit more about this wilderness season that you were in, because you said that the wilderness didn't shake your trust in Christ. And that's a big thing, because I think it probably would for a lot of people. And so when you think about this season, it didn't shake your trust in Christ, but it did shake your trust in the frameworks that you had built around him.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about what those frameworks were and how did they begin to fall apart?
Yeah. Similar, again, not that I hadn't read these things in the Bible before and honestly taught them. But what I began to realize is that I had had a subtle quid pro quo with God. So it's one thing if you do something wrong. So let's, so I make a mistake, I sin, and then there's consequences for my sin. And so there's a part of us that can reconcile that in our heart and mind. Like, I messed up. Yeah, it cost me this, darn it. Okay, Lord, thank you for your grace and your forgiveness. It was a very, very different experience for me to have truly believed that I obeyed God. I did what he asked me to, and it fell apart. And there was very much in me, there was a lot of, and I don't want to over dramatize it, because by comparison to what many people walk through, my stuff is really small. But there was a Job-like experience to me of like, hey, what the heck is going on here? Like, if I'd known it, like, don't send me back then. Don't let me go be the lead guy there if it's going to go this way. Like, why? So, but what it was revealing to me and what God began to speak to me about was like, hey, wait a minute. I never promised, you in that just because you did what I asked you to, it was going to go well. In fact, the Bible's quite clear in the opposite, almost all the way through it. And so then the God's like, hey, you're fixating on your disappointments, what you're disappointed about. But all of your disappointments are built on unmet expectations. And you're not examining your expectations. What were your expectations of me? What are your expectations of this world? And so that was this really good, like, it was a Job-esque moment of like, hey, gird your loins, we're going to have a conversation. And the Lord challenging and pushing on these things like, man, like, good job doing what I asked you to. I'm not now obligated to give you what you want or have it work out the way you want it to. And so that was the beginning of kind of that reframe. And it was where this picture of the wilderness. So if you think about the wilderness in narrative in scripture, you've got Israel's rescued from slavery in Egypt, and then they're told about a promised land, and then they spend 40 years in the wilderness. And they're not the only ones. Like, you see Jesus go in the wilderness, you see Elijah in the wilderness, you see a lot of biblical characters spend a lot of time in wilderness. But when I take that, if I kind of fold that over into the Christian experience, I've been rescued from slavery to sin. Like, when I placed my faith in Jesus, I became a follower of his. Death no longer owns me. And one day I will see a promised land. And Revelation tells us there will be no more sorrow, no more pain, right? That God's home will be among his people. He will wipe away every tear from every eye. But in between is the wilderness. It's often called the already but not yet, right? That we have these promises, we have this new life in Christ, but we don't experience the fullness of it. And some of that is our doing, our sinfulness. Some of it is the sin of others that gets on us, right? Some of it is just the fact that the world is fractured. Like, it's not because I didn't read my Bible that a tornado happens, right? Like, it's just our world is broken. And so what God began to teach me is that this life is the wilderness. And if you look at it, rather than, if I think of the wilderness as a season, then I'm going to spend my energy going, okay, how do I get out of this? What do I got to fix? What do I got to do? What did I do wrong? What can I do right? How can I atone? Whatever it would be. And that's where all my energy goes, versus if I can stand back and go, okay, life is a wilderness. That means it's always going to be a mix of beauty and brokenness. Every day, I'm going to see beautiful things. I'm going to see broken things. And I'm going to have to work through and wrestle through all that. But God is here in the midst of all of it. If my energy is going there rather than trying to figure out how to get out of the wilderness, I'm going to be far more peaceful, far more at rest, far more encouraged, all of those things. And so that was the big aha, where it was like, oh, okay, I need to stop trying to get out of the wilderness, because until I die, I'm not going to. And I need to start looking for God in the midst of it. And that's what began really the journey that became the book.
I love that because, I went through my old, ooh, I went through my own wilderness season, and I think a lot of people, they're in the middle of a wilderness season and they're like, man, this is just not going my way. This is going wrong. That's going wrong. God has left me, blah, 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 and they get to the point where they just feel defeated. They feel broken. And I think when you get to that point, you really need to realize that, hey, I'm probably asking the wrong question. I instead of asking God, where are you? Ask God, what are you trying to teach me? Because it's those wilderness seasons that I feel like we learn our biggest lessons that then enable us to perform whatever the task is that he has for us in the next season that he's calling us to.
100%.
And so I love the analogy of the wilderness season that you used there.
Well, I mean, think about the book of Hebrews says something absolutely insane. It says that Jesus learned through suffering.
Yeah.
Jesus, I mean, that we're talking about the creator of all things, God himself, who indwelled, became a man, fully human, fully God, and yet somehow, even though he's fully God, he learned through suffering. So there is something about the Spirit leads Jesus into the wilderness right after his baptism, and for 40 days of testing, right? And so there's something about, you're right, there's something about wilderness, there's something about hard things that God uses to shape us and mold us and form us, if we are looking for him and looking for, like you're saying, if we're asking the right questions and we're looking for what it is he's trying to accomplish in us, not necessarily around us or fix us.
Yeah. So, you're in this wilderness season, and we could spend all day talking about this. And so you're
Part 4.
to be continued on part 10 of this episode. So when you're thinking about all of this, the clarity is gone. Nothing has felt stable now, and you're in this season. What did trusting God actually look like for you in this day-to-day newfound season of wilderness, if you will, that you found yourself in?
Yeah, it was a lot of different things at the time. Don't focus on what God isn't saying, focus on what he is saying, right? Because oftentimes he feels really quiet. And so you're like, hey, is this thing on? Hello, Lord, are you there? But think about it. Like if I'm in a class full of fourth graders, yelling at them is not the best way to get them to quiet down. Whispering is. And so I do think that God seemingly gets quiet when we're in hard things, not because he's playing a game of Marco Polo with us, but because if our hearts are tender enough and our ears are attentive enough and we quiet ourselves, we'll start to hear the whisper. Again, this is Elijah, right? God had just shown up in these massive, like, fire on an altar, burning the offerings and all these crazy things. And then Elijah runs into the wilderness because he's being threatened with his life. And then he goes to the mountain of the Lord, and the Lord doesn't show up in the thunder, and he doesn't show up in the storm. What's he show? He shows up in a whisper. And so so that was one thing that was significant for me. But I'll be honest, the best way I could synthesize it is, and this is again a more recent discovery or rediscovery, is Psalm 37, which says, "Trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness." That's the first couple of verses. And so trust in the Lord. So my hope is ultimately in him. Do good. What's the next thing? Like, I may not have the next 10 things, but I know what I need to do for today, right? Like Jesus said in Matthew 6, I think it is, right? Like, don't worry about tomorrow. It has enough problems of its own. So trust in the Lord, do good, dwell in the land, meaning be present where I'm at. If I'm at my daughter's volleyball game, be at the volleyball game, be with them, like be present, like work because I'm a future thinker. So I'm always like, what's the next thing? Where do I go? How can I take the next mountain? What's the next thing? And so learning to dwell in the land, be where I'm at. I can long for all the things I want to be in, but ultimately I got to be here. And befriend faithfulness, which is actually one of my favorite translations of that verse. That idea of making faithfulness my home. We talked about identity, right? So I heard a pastor once say, let Jesus be extraordinary, you be faithful. Like, stop trying to be extraordinary. You just worry about being faithful and let Jesus be extraordinary. And so befriending faithfulness is like the win is faithfulness. It's well done, good and faithful servant. And so learning how to live that out. And so I do, like Psalm 37, 1 and 2, I chew on that every day, especially when I'm wrestling with things where I feel like I'm falling behind or things aren't working out or whatever. But that has been the biggest passage of scripture that's really been an anchor in this rebuilding process.
I love that. Stop trying to do his job.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only one qualified to do it.
Yeah.
And so, the seasons of wilderness are basically a refining season. Like you said, he's whispering and he's just waiting for you to stop and listen, to stop and quiet down so that you can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes he's been yelling at us and we're just not hearing it. We've got selective hearing, as wives like to say husbands have,
Yeah.
You've
Or
got
my kid, like my kids have selective hearing for sure.
And being a dad, I can say that too.
See, there you go, 100%.
So, during this season of refining, we'll call it,
Mm-hmm.
Things die because they're no longer relevant. So when
Mm-hmm.
you think about that, what had to die in this season, and what was it that survived the season and actually stayed solid that surprised you?
Geez, that's such a great question. I think the biggest thing that had to die was my perpetual need to try and fix myself and everything else and prove myself and everything else. And so, like, on my desk, and it's funny because I've had this as an illustration for a long time, but on my desk I always have a Rubik's cube. And it's always unsolved. No one's allowed to solve it. So, like, my daughter's friends will come over and they'll solve it, and I just mess it back up. And I kept it when I was working in ministry, and I still keep it to this day because it was always a reminder that, like, people are not a problem to solve. I'm not a problem to solve. Life is not a problem to solve, right? It's gonna be messy. It's gonna be clunky at times. Like, it's not linear. Like, growth isn't linear. And so part of what had to die in me is that, like, oh, things are hard. What do I got to do to fix it? Right. Which is just me grabbing that. That's not an easy yoke. That's not a light burden. That's me playing God. Like you said, right. That's Genesis 3 kind of stuff. Like, I want to be like God, knowing both good and evil, meaning I want, move over. I'm driving now. Which is absurd, right? Like, I'm that's not what I've been designed for. And then the other thing that had to die was that proving. And one of my favorite passages of scripture, one of my favorite characters in the New Testament is Peter. I identify a lot with Peter because he was a knucklehead in every sense of the word. Like, and I love that about Peter. He was ready, fire, aim all the way through. But in John 21, you have this amazing scene. So, like, Peter denies Jesus at the as he's being arrested 3 times. The rooster crows. He runs away in shame. Jesus is crucified. Peter's not there at the crucifixion that we know of. The scripture doesn't say he is. Peter's not there at the burial. Peter comes to the resurrection because Mary comes and he races John to the tomb, and then Peter's like, they're in the upper room. He's like, I'm going fishing. Like, this isn't working. And so Peter goes out fishing, and he and a couple of the disciples are with him, and they look and they see a man on the shore, and the figure invites them for a meal, and John says, it's the Lord, and Peter jumps in the water and he swims to Jesus, right? Like again, impetuous Peter jumps in the water, swims to Jesus. Then they have a meal, and then Peter and Jesus go for a walk. And this is this famous passage in chapter 21 where Jesus says, do you love me more than these? And John says, Peter says, I love you, Lord. He says, okay, I'll feed my sheep. And then he does that 3 times, right? Kind of mirroring the 3 denials. The third time that Jesus says, do you love me more than these? It says that Peter was dejected. I'm paraphrasing, and he says, but Lord, you know all things. And it's like, in that moment, Peter was like, I'm done trying to prove myself to you. Like, I could sit here all day and say, no, Lord, I love you more than these. Like, I'll take care of your sheep. Like, and that was, for me, that was a huge part of, or is, I don't even want to say it is a huge part of my journey of going like, Lord, you know my heart. Like, you know it better than I know it. Like, what could I possibly do to convince you of anything? And so that letting go of proving myself and letting go of performing for God in some weird way, not even for others, but just for him. Like, see, I'm worthy of it. I'm doing it. I'm like, look, Dad, no hands, right? Like, that kind of a vibe. And so those are the 2 things that had to die. The thing that has survived is, weirdly enough, I still have a deep, deep love for Jesus's church. In all of its messiness, even with the scars that it's left on me. Am I a little more cautious? Probably, but I still love the church, and I still believe that the church can be what Jesus envisions it to be, and that pastors and leaders and people are worth investing into. It's why I'm doing the coaching stuff I'm doing now. Like, I want to help the church be all that it can be for the sake of the kingdom and for the world. So that didn't die. And my love for Jesus didn't die. My frustration with him is still there. I wrestle regularly. All the things, but like I like to say, God wears big boy pants. Like, he's not afraid of my questions and my doubts and my anger or my frustration or any of those kinds of things. And so learning to just continue to bring that to him honestly and admit where I'm at, even if it's not pretty or nice or tied up in a bow. All of that has been really, really healthy in a really cool way.
Yeah, we are broken people living in a broken world, and pastors and elders and whatever other title you want to insert from a church leadership team, they're no different. And it's healthy to wrestle with things and ask questions. That's what God wants of us. He wants us to ask him
Yep.
questions and to be have that kind of a relationship where you can build off of your past and take the questions and the answers that he gives you and build a stronger relationship with him.
Yep.
You know, you said at one point that you had to unlearn a version of your faith that said, if I'm faithful and work hard, everything else will work out. I think that's something that a lot of people believe in of themselves, right? And so I'm curious, now you're in this rebuilding phase. How do you live faithfully without rebuilding another performance-based identity?
Great question. It's not easy. Um, one of the key components is my expensive friend, my counselor. He is a big part of it because, I mean, and just even with what I'm doing now, right? I wrote a book. I'm trying to promote the book, and so it's really cool. But what the world's like now. Like in order to promote something, you kind of have to develop this influencer-ish kind of weird online presence, and I'm not comfortable with that. I fought it initially, and then realized that the book wasn't just going to magically show up in people's brains. And so I had to steward the message, right? That's ultimately what we're doing with what we're doing, right? You and I both in our own ways are stewarding a message we believe God's given us. But in that there is a dark side, right? There is absolutely like, the hunger for some sort of clout or accolades or money, whatever it would be, like whatever, pick your vice and all those things. And so I think the best thing that I've learned in navigating that, because it's not going anywhere. Like that's a reality of the world. And even if I did step back into vocational ministry, which I'm not opposed to, like I'm open-handed. If the Lord wants me, I don't know that I'd ever be a lead pastor again. I don't know that that's my best space, in this season of life. I feel more like a coach than a quarterback at this season of life, but I'm open-handed. But the thing that I learned was, I think I used to try and take, when you have this duality in your life, right? You have like the pure motive and then the shadow side of you. I think for a long time, it was like, okay, I want to elevate the pure motive and I want to try and squash the false motive. I just want to like, oh, I don't want that thought. That's a bad thought. Like, right. Like, and push it down. And I think what I've learned is that it's really not about, compressing that thought as much as it's about confessing it. And so rather than, so like when I get an opportunity to speak at something, whether it's on a podcast or at a church or whatever it is, it's coming before the Lord and going, Lord, like, again, you know all things. Like, you know that in this, my heart is that whatever it is you've given me to share has an impact on people's love for you and desire to follow you and all those things. And I know that there's a part of me that wants to be cool and wants to be relevant and wants to be loved and thought of as smart and all those things. And so you have to sort that out. I can't. Like, I'm incapable of sorting that myself. And so I give that to you. And I trust that you know me better than I do, and you'll take care of it. And so that's really, like, that's probably the core thing that I just hold to in everything that I'm doing right now, and trying to, and I not perfectly, but it's like trying to be attentive to those things at all times.
Yeah, that's well said. It's one of those things that like you said, we're both trying to do the best with what we're given and relay the message that God has given us to share with people. And I think that's one of the things it's all about heart posture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it'd be very easy for you or I to start getting a big head. Yeah, we're on all these podcasts, or yeah, we've got a book out or whatever. Because I have a book out, you have a book out,
Yep.
and it would be easy to do that when. And I actually had somebody ask me the other day. They're like, why do you do what you do? And I said, I'm doing what I'm doing because it's what I was told to do,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not in it to sell 1 million copies of my book. If I can sell one copy and it touches one person, then it's done what it's supposed to do. And that's the way you approach things, or I approach things. And I get the sense that you do too. And as long as you keep that heart posture, I think you're in a good spot. Um,
Yeah, it's hard, but you're absolutely right. And it is, you have to be attentive. Like, the heart is wicked and deceitful above all things. Who could know it?
yeah,
So
the enemy
I
wants to use it against you.
100%. So I need to be attentive to that. And I need people around me who are going to call me on that. Like
Yeah.
my wife or friends, whatever it be, who are going to be like, hey man, like what's really going on here? You know?
Getting a little big head there.
Yeah, exactly. You're not as cool as you think you are.
You know, there's a lot of people out there that are, pastors, they're leaders, they're everyday believers, um, who feel like something in their life is collapsing.
Mm.
But they don't feel like that they don't feel like they can say it out loud.
Hmm.
What would you say to that person?
I there's a few things. First and foremost, say the hard thing. Like, say it to the Lord. Say it the way you're feeling it. Like, let Him filter through it. Again, He wears big boy pants. God is not afraid of our frustrations. Again, I go back to Job, right? And Job was very candid with God. Now, the scripture says that he never blamed God for what he was going through. And so that was counted to him as righteousness. So he didn't go, God, this is your fault that I'm going through this. So it was never that posture. But the what the heck was definitely the posture. And that's okay. Like, God is not afraid of those kinds of things. And so it starts with your willingness to just put your cards on the table. Don't try and paint a nice verse on it. Like, we try to skip to resolution, especially if you've been around church for a while, because you know truth. Like, God works all things to the good, right? I know the scripture, but right now that's not what I'm feeling. And if I don't allow myself to lament, this is what David did so well. Lament, like, be okay grieving it. It's okay just to say, God, this stinks and I don't have an answer. And I don't know what you're doing, and I'm mad. This feels unfair. I'm not saying it is unfair. I'm saying it feels unfair. Starting there, I think, is the most important thing, because until we can recognize, you've talked so much about masks, right? If we can't take off our mask for the Lord, there's like, we got no hope taking off masks for the people around us who want to try and help. And so to be able to just lay all the cards on the table and say, Lord, like, this is how I'm feeling. And that can be no holds barred, and again, He may hold you to account for it. I mean, He did for Job. He came along and said, buckle up, buddy. We're going to have a conversation. And then He's like, hey, where were you when I created the foundations of the earth? And Job's like, all right, I get it. And God's like, no, we're not done with this conversation. Right. So there's definitely accountability to the creator of all things in that. But I would say start there. Start with being brutally honest with the Lord. And then you really need to talk to somebody. Paul Tripp, pastor and counselor, said, nobody lies to you more than you do, because nobody talks to you more than you do. And the longer you stay in your head, the more crud that you're going to feed yourself that probably isn't accurate. And so you need an external voice, someone trusted. Vulnerability is a result of safety. So someone safe. For me, it's been my wife more so than anyone else. And you just go, hey, this is what's going on. And trust them. Trust that God's given them enough wisdom and guidance to walk with you, and that you don't have to couch it to protect them from you.
Yeah. You know what? And if you're out there listening, you're like, I don't have anybody like that. I'm not married and I don't have any close friends that I can talk to. Then you know what? Now would be a good time to go get yourself a well-paid friend.
Yes.
Get yourself into counseling. I'm in counseling myself, and I value every time I go into that office, because it's somebody that I can take off my mask with and be 100% vulnerable and honest with. And there's something so freeing about that, and being able to work through things.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you as well to speak to the listeners right now as well, and answer this question. If somebody is out there and they feel like they're losing clarity, they're losing their identity, they're losing their direction, how do they even begin to trust God in that space instead of trying to control it themselves?
Yeah. If you're listening and you have the answer to that question, call me. I'd love to know. But here's what I would say. Zephaniah 3:17, one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible, says, "The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save. He takes great delight in you. He quiets you with his love and rejoices over you with songs of praise." And the image that the prophet Zephaniah is painting of God is of a father singing over his child. And if it's really hard to believe that that's God, but all indications are that is God. And so if you're struggling to trust, I would ask you first to just process and think through who is it you're struggling to trust? Because it's probably not that God. It's probably a different version. Maybe it's, for a long time I saw God as a disappointed father who was like, yeah, I've saved you and I've rescued you, but you're letting me down. Right. And so our view of God, Tozer talks about this, our view of God shapes our relationship to him, right? No one wants to talk to the person they think is mad at them. And so if you have a broken view of God, which we all do, but if you haven't really explored who is God, what is he really like? This is what the gospel is. This is what the scripture teaches. This is what Jesus is, the visible image of the invisible God. And so you read the gospels and say, is that a God I could trust in? That Jesus, beyond the wisdom and the teaching, but the way that he loves, the patience, the grace, the mercy, the sacrifice, can I lean into, would I want to hang out with that guy? If you say yes, then that's the God of the Bible. And so you can bring it all to him. And he says his yoke is easy and his burden is light, which doesn't mean there aren't complications in life. It just means that you no longer have to, like you said, carry all the weight. I often say that walking with Jesus is about surrendering more, not trying harder. It's a lot like golf. The harder you try and hit a golf ball, the worse things go. And this is why I don't play golf, because I do not have the disposition for it. Because as soon as I get a good hit, I'm like, oh, I got it. And then I come hacking at it. And then there's bad words and I have to apologize and it goes sideways from there. So faith is very much the same thing. It's a surrender more than try harder. And we don't have to bring a lot. We just have to come to him with open hands and go, okay, God, I don't even know what the next step is, but I trust that you love me and you're for me. And I want you to lead me.
Love it. Well, I have one more question for you, but before I do that, I want to invite you to tell the listeners where they can find you online and give us the name of your book again.
Yeah, so the book is called The Wilderness Way: Finding Freedom in Life's Fractures. It's available on Amazon and all the, the retailer type stores. The best way to connect with it or other resources, I have a workbook that I wrote for it. There's some wilderness oriented worship music that we're producing that's coming out as we're releasing singles every month. And then an album's coming out probably in September. All of that's available, linked through in my website, which is dustinkleinschmidt.com. Don't worry. If you kind of get close in Google, it finds me. So you don't have to spell the last name right. You just have to kind of it starts with a K, ends with a T. There's another 12 letters in between there. You can just kind of meander your way. But you can contact me if you're wrestling with stuff and you want to talk. I would love to talk with you. Everything is kind of there. That's kind of the hub for all of it.
Perfect. And if you're out there and you're like, what was that name again? Check the show notes. I'll have a link to his website in the show notes to make it easy.
Thank you, Wesley.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, okay. So I have one last question for you. And this is something I love to do on every episode, whether it be my solo episodes on Tuesdays or my guest episodes on Thursdays, like we're doing with you here, is I love to leave my listeners with an action step.
Mm-hmm.
And so for today, I'm going to give that to you. And I want you to answer this. For someone listening who feels like their life or their identity is unraveling right now, what is one step that they can take this week to begin walking with God in that wilderness instead of trying to escape it?
Jeez, I really wrestled with this because it is hard to go like, what's a thing? Do the next right thing. So like the next right thing, oftentimes, trust in the Lord, do good, dwell in the land, befriend faithfulness, right? The next right thing is probably we'll lay down in bed tonight or tomorrow or whatever time you're listening to this, or get up tomorrow and just thank God that you have breath in your lungs, because that's a gift. And start there. Start with, thank you, God, that I have breath in my lungs. And then move on to the next thing. Thank you that I have a job, if you have a job. Thank you that I do have a spouse, or if, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Thank you that traffic wasn't as bad on the way to work. Thank you that I got a better parking spot than I normally get at the office. Again, like, gratitude goes such a long way, especially when we're in hard seasons. And they don't have to be big things. They can be these simple little things that you just are like, wow, God, thank you for that. And I think if we orient our heart that way, then what happens is we start to see the bigger things that he's doing under the surface that maybe we wouldn't have noticed otherwise.
I love that. Well, Dustin, thank you so much for coming on Unmasked and sharing with the community your story.
Thank you, Wesley. Thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. And thank you for joining us today here on Unmasked. And again, just a huge thanks to Dustin for coming on and being so open and honest with us. If something in this episode spoke to you, don't let it stop with you. Share it with the one person that God put on your heart while you were listening, because you never know whose breakthrough might start with just a simple message from you. If you want more encouragement, you want to work with me one-on-one, or you're interested in having me speak at your church or event, you can find everything you need at wesleyfarnsworth.com. And make sure you join the Unmasked community by connecting with me on social media so that we can keep walking this journey together. Until next time, remember that grace is greater than your past, and true freedom begins the moment that you choose to live unmasked. God bless you.